Hello my YouTube family and night owls. Welcome back to Crime Whispers Now. I know a lot of you drift off to sleep with these stories playing in the background. So before you close your eyes tonight, I thought it would be fun if everyone left a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from, and, of course, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the cases we cover here. So, let's get cozy, relax, and begin tonight's story. On November 20th, 2018, a young English backpacker named Grace Millen landed in New Zealand. She was on the adventure of a lifetime. Having just spent 6 weeks exploring South America, this was meant to be a 2-week stay, part of her gap year travels before returning home. But only 10 days after arriving in Auckland, Grace suddenly vanished. What started as a missing person case quickly escalated into a full homicide investigation, one that shocked not only New Zealand, but the entire world. Police soon arrested a man named Jesse Kempson and charged him with Grace's murder. But how did Grace cross paths with Kempson? What happened the night they met? And how did investigators uncover the horrifying truth? Stay with me until the end of this video as we unravel the events that led to Grace's tragic death. A story that reveals chilling details. Even seasoned detectives struggled to comprehend Grace. Emmy Rose Millen was born on December 2nd, 1996, in Wickford, Essex, England. She was the youngest of 3 children and grew up close to her parents, David and Gillian, and her 2 older brothers. Friends and family described Grace as warm, caring, and full of life. She attended St. Joseph's Catholic Primary School, Brentwood Ursuline Convent High School, and later St. Thomas More High School eventually. She graduated from the University of Lincoln with a degree in advertising and marketing. Grace was the kind of person people naturally gravitated towards, confident, outgoing, and fun-loving. In 2018, after finishing university, she decided to take a gap year to travel the world. She dreamed of seeing new places, meeting new people, and discovering more about herself. In October 2018, she set off for South America. Over 6 weeks, she traveled through countries like Peru, documenting her adventures online, keeping in regular touch with her family, and sharing her art along the way. Her loved ones said she was most excited about New Zealand, with plans to visit Fiji and Australia before finally returning home by late November. Grace had arrived in Auckland and checked into Base Backpackers Hostel like many travelers her age. Grace was also using Tinder during her trip. On the night she checked into the hostel, she matched with a man named Jesse Kempson. At first, she wasn't impressed with his advances, but after some back and forth messaging, she eventually agreed to meet him. They arranged to meet at Sky City Hotel on the evening of December 1st, just 1 day before Grace's 22nd birthday. That evening, Grace left the hostel to meet Kempson. She thought it would be a simple night out in a new city, but sadly, she would never return the next day. December 2nd, her birthday messages from friends and family began flooding in, but unlike every other day of her travels, Grace never replied. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and there were no posts on her social media for someone as active and connected as Grace. This was immediately alarming. Her family kept trying for days, but when there was still no word, they reported her missing to Auckland police on December 5. At first, authorities suggested maybe Grace had gone off with new friends or misplaced her phone. But when they contacted her hostel, they learned she had never checked back in after leaving to meet Kempson. Even more unsettling, all her belongings were still in her room. Police quickly shifted gears. They pulled CCTV footage from local bars, restaurants, and hotels. It wasn't long before they saw Grace on camera walking into Sky City to meet someone, and that someone was Jesse Kempson. CCTV footage from that night gave investigators a chilling window into Grace's final hours. When Grace first met Jesse Kempson at Sky City, he approached her with confidence, but their hug seemed awkward, almost forced. After exchanging greetings, the two left together and walked to Andy's Burger Bar. From the footage, things looked normal. They were drinking, laughing, and even sharing the occasional kiss. Grace looked comfortable, as though she had known Kempson for far longer than just a few hours. By 9:40 p.m., the cameras captured them, leaving the bar, arms wrapped around each other, heading back to Kempson's apartment. But one small moment stood out. While Grace went to the restroom, Jessie immediately began rummaging through her handbag, carefully checking through her belongings before she returned. That same evening, Grace was messaging her close friend Alicia Amina Ashcroft back in England. Grace told her she was having a great time, though it was clear from the messages that she was quite drunk. Amina admitted later that some of Grace's descriptions of Kempson raised red flags, but since Grace seemed happy, she didn't push the issue. Grace ended her messages by saying she'd fill Amina in on the details tomorrow. That tomorrow never came at this stage. Police didn't yet know who Grace had been with, but when investigators combed through her social media, they noticed something strange. Shortly after Grace had returned from the restroom that night, a man named Jesse Shane Kempson commented on one of her Facebook photos, writing, "Beautiful, very radiant." This comment became the lead police needed to connect Grace to her mystery date. So, who was Jesse Kempson? Born December 28, 1991, in Wellington, New Zealand, Kempson had a troubled childhood. His parents separated when he was just 9, and he was largely raised by his father and grandfather. But unlike Grace's warm and supportive upbringing, Jesse's background was riddled with instability and emotional volatility. When investigators began interviewing people who knew him, a disturbing pattern emerged. Friends, family, even casual acquaintances all described Jesse as a compulsive liar. His stepbrother bluntly called him a pathological liar who craved power and control. He would invent stories about himself, at one point even telling people he was dying of cancer. Kempson lied about his career, too, to some. He claimed he was a high-powered Woolworths executive earning a six-figure salary. To others, he said he was a professional softball player. In truth, he was unemployed, living off state benefits, and had just been fired from a sales job the very same day he met Grace. When police connected these dots, Jesse quickly became their prime suspect. They went to his apartment building, but he wasn't home. Eventually, he returned only to turn and try to walk away as soon as he spotted police. Waiting officers chased him down in full view of bystanders and brought him in for questioning. When interviewed, Kempson gave a carefully crafted story. He admitted he had met Grace through Tinder, but claimed he wasn't sure if she was real. Because of the risk of catfishing, he said they had a nice night, ended with a hug and a kiss, and then went their separate ways, agreeing to stay in touch. But detectives weren't convinced. They had already seen the CCTV footage showing Grace and Jesse entering his apartment, building together footage that directly contradicted his version of events. He search warrant for Kempson's apartment soon revealed more red flags. He was estranged from his family, claimed to suffer from anxiety, and had recently posted a strange message on Facebook, apologizing for his arrogance and selfishness that had ruined relationships in his life. Women who had dated him also painted a disturbing picture. At first, he would present himself as sophisticated and charming, but soon he became controlling and overbearing. He demanded intimate details about their sexual histories and constantly pushed for personal information. Meanwhile, investigators were piecing together his movements after Grace vanished in the morning of December 2nd, 2018, the day Grace should have been celebrating her 22nd birthday. CCTV captured Jesse leaving his apartment alone at 8 a.m. He went to the lobby, then to a nearby shop, where he bought a suitcase and cleaning supplies. By 11 a.m., he was at a car rental agency, picking up a red Toyota Corolla. And, shockingly, just hours later, he went on another Tinder date. The woman he met that day later told police that Jesse's behavior was deeply unsettling. He talked about buying a large duffel bag for sports equipment, and even brought up the subject of murder for investigators. Jesse Kempson's behavior after Grace's disappearance was nothing short of disturbing. On December 2nd, the very morning Grace should have been waking up to birthday messages from her family, Jesse was already out buying a large suitcase and cleaning supplies just hours later, instead of appearing concerned about the woman he had just spent the night with. He was swiping on Tinder again, lining up another date. The young woman he met that afternoon later told police she felt increasingly uncomfortable around him over dinner. Jesse casually brought up the subject of murder and mentioned that he'd recently bought a big duffel bag to her. It sounded bizarre, unsettling enough that she cut the date short. Meanwhile, detectives were scrutinizing Jesse's every move. CCTV footage showed him coming and going from his apartment multiple times, often carrying shopping bags and cleaning products. He rented a red Toyota Corolla, and over the next 2 days, his movements became even more suspicious. On December 3rd, he was seen again in stores buying more cleaning supplies, as well as a second suitcase. Later that night, Jesse went on yet another Tinder date. This woman would later testify that Jesse told her about a man who had been imprisoned after a partner died during rough sex, a story he chillingly seemed to use as a way of testing her reaction. At the same time, Jesse's internet searches painted a horrifying picture. Forensic analysts recovered search history from his phone that included phrases like the hottest fire waiter care ranges, a rugged forested area west of Auckland, large bags near me, flesh-eating birds. These were not the searches of a man worried about a missing date. They were the actions of someone planning to hide a body. On December 6th, police obtained a warrant to examine Jesse's rented Corolla inside. They found traces of blood in the trunk. DNA analysis later confirmed what they feared. The blood matched Grace Melanathy. Investigation now shifted from a missing person case to a homicide. Days later, police traced Jesse's movements out to the Waiter Care Ranges, a dense and remote area of bushland just outside Auckland. On December 9th, 2018, their search ended in tragedy. Hidden off the roadside, inside one of the suitcases Jesse had purchased, lay the body of Grace Milanesh. Had been placed in the suitcase, buried under soil and vegetation. The grim discovery was made almost a full week after she was last seen alive. When confronted with this evidence, Jesse changed his story yet again. He admitted that Grace had died in his apartment, but claimed it was an accident during consensual sex. He told detectives that Grace had asked him to choke her during intimacy, and when he realized she was no longer breathing, he panicked. But his actions in the days that followed, the lies, the Tinder dates, the suitcase, the cleaning supplies, told a very different story. With Grace's body found and Jesse Kempson under arrest, the case moved to court. From the very beginning, Kempson stuck to his claim that Grace's death had been a tragic accident during consensual sex. His defense argued that she had asked him to choke her, that she enjoyed rough intimacy, and that things had gone too far without him realizing. But prosecutors dismantled this narrative piece by piece. First, they highlighted Jesse's behavior after Grace died. If her death had truly been an accident, why didn't he call for help? Why didn't he call an ambulance or even attempt CPR? Instead, he went out and bought cleaning supplies, a suitcase, and then casually went on Tinder dates while Grace's body remained in his apartment. Second, they presented his internet search history on the night Grace died. Jesse had searched for terms like the hottest fire, large bags near me, and waiter care ranges. These searches showed forethought and planning, not the panic of an accidental death. Third, they introduced testimony from Jesse's other Tinder dates, women who had been with him in the days before and after Grace's disappearance. Described him as manipulative, controlling, and obsessed with violent sexual fantasies. One woman recalled him talking about a man in prison whose partner had died during rough sex, eerily foreshadowing the defense he would later use. Grace's parents, David and Gillian, traveled to New Zealand for the trial. Sitting in court, they listened as intimate details of their daughter's life were dissected and twisted in Jesse's attempt to save himself for them. It was a cruel second loss, their daughter's memory being dragged into arguments about sex and consent, when the reality was far simpler. Grace had trusted the wrong person, and that trust had cost her life. After weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. It took them just 5 hours to reach a unanimous verdict. November 22nd, 2019, Jesse Kempson was found guilty of the murder of Grace Milanethi. Courtroom erupted in silence. Grace's family, who had sat with quiet dignity throughout the proceedings, wept as the verdict was read at sentencing. The judge called Jesse's actions devious, cunning, and self-interested. He was handed a life sentence, with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. But that was not the end of Jesse Kempson's story. After his conviction, further investigations revealed he had committed other serious crimes against women. He was later convicted in separate trials of multiple counts of sexual assault and rape, involving 2 other victims. For those offenses, he received additional, lengthy prison terms, ensuring that he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. For Grace's family, however, no sentence could undo their loss. Her father, David Millen, described his daughter as a beautiful, loving, outgoing young woman who had her whole life ahead of her. He said, "Grace was our sunshine. She brought light into every room, and she deserved so much more than this." Grace's death sparked conversations around the world about violence against women, particularly women traveling alone in New Zealand. Candlelight vigils were held in her memory, and thousands gathered to honor the young woman whose life was cut short so senselessly. Grace Millen left home to see the world, chasing adventure and beauty instead. She became the victim of a man whose lies, violence, and manipulation had destroyed lives long before he ever met her. Her story is a reminder, not of fear, but of the importance of protecting one another, speaking out against violence, and remembering the lives lost too soon. It's chilling to think how one wrong move, one careless slip, can trap a murderer in a web of their own lies, landing them in prison for life. Tell me, have you ever had a conversation as bizarre and as frightening as murder on a first date? Comment below and let me know. One of Jesse Kempson's Tinder dates later revealed just how disturbing his behavior had been during their meal. Jesse told her about a man who once convinced his girlfriend to engage in rough sex involving strangulation. According to Jesse, the experiment went wrong, the girlfriend died, and the man was charged only with manslaughter, as if that wasn't unsettling enough. Jesse went on to explain, almost casually, that police dogs can only detect bodies buried more than 4 feet underground by that point. His date realized she wasn't sitting across from a typical man at all. She made excuses to leave as quickly as possible. When Jesse offered her a ride home, she refused, but Jesse didn't seem fazed. He carried on with his day, as though nothing was out of the ordinary. He gathered more cleaning supplies and rented a rug cleaning machine, telling staff at the rental shop that he needed it for a wine stain on his carpet. CCTV footage revealed what really happened. Next, around 9 p.m. on December 2nd, Jesse returned to his apartment with the machine. By 9:30 p.m., he was back in the elevator, this time hauling a trolley with 2 heavy suitcases. He loaded them into the trunk of his rented red Toyota Corolla. The following morning, December 3rd, Jesse was out again, this time buying a shovel. He then dropped one of the suitcases off at a dry cleaner before taking the rental car through a car wash, where cameras caught him power washing the vehicle in an attempt to destroy evidence. By December 5th, more CCTV footage showed Jesse disposing of bags into dumpsters around Auckland. Meanwhile, Grace's father, David Millen, had flown to New Zealand to assist police and to make a desperate public plea for information at a press conference beside Auckland detectives. David struggled to hold back tears, pausing several times as grief overwhelmed him. He begged for help in finding his daughter. The lead investigator, Detective Inspector Scott Beard, confirmed that a person of interest had been identified. When first interviewed, Jesse told police that he had last seen Grace at 10 p.m. on December 1st. When they said goodbye and parted ways, he even claimed she had later blocked him on Tinder. But during a second interview, his story shifted this time. Jesse said that both he and Grace were drunk when they returned to his apartment. They made out, Then Grace allegedly lowered the music and began talking about 50 Shades of Grey and bondage, according to Jesse. She bit him, asked him to do the same, and then encouraged him to choke her. He insisted it was all consensual and that she wanted. I've claimed that after their encounter, he went to take a shower, fell asleep, and woke to find Grace lying motionless on the floor, blood coming from her nose. He swore it was nothing more than violent sex gone wrong, but the forensic evidence told a different story. Police found Grace's blood saturated deep into Jesse's carpet, far more than would be expected from a simple nosebleed. Pressed about the location of Grace's body, Jesse eventually agreed to lead detectives to the site. December 9, 2018. At 4 p.m., police discovered Grace Millen's body inside a suitcase buried in the Waitakere Ranges, about 12 miles west of Auckland. At a press conference that evening, Detective Inspector Scott Beard addressed the media with a heavy heart. He confirmed that a body had been found, believed to be Grace. Though formal identification was still pending, he acknowledged how unbearable this time must have been for Grace's family, extending condolences on behalf of the police. The next day, December 10, 2018, Jesse Kempson made his first court appearance. He was formally charged with the murder of Grace Millen. However, his identity was initially suppressed after his defense filed an appeal, granting him temporary name protection for the early stages of the case. On December 10, 2018, Jesse Kempson made his first appearance in court. He was formally charged with the murder of Grace Millen. At this stage, his identity was suppressed due to New Zealand's legal rules, an automatic interim order that prevented the media from naming him until appeals on the matter were resolved. This suppression would remain in place for months, frustrating both the public and the international media, who wanted to put a face to the man accused of such a horrific crime, despite the restrictions. The details of the case were already shocking the world when Kempson's trial began in November 2019. His defense took a deeply unsettling route. His lawyers argued that Grace's death was not murder, but a tragic accident during consensual rough sex. They claimed she had asked Kempson to apply pressure to her neck, a practice linked to erotic asphyxiation, and that she died when things went too far. But the prosecution painted a much darker picture. They emphasized Jesse's cold and calculated behavior in the days after Grace's death, the cleaning supplies, the rental car, the Tinder dates, the Google searches about disposing of a body, and the way he calmly lied to police during his interviews. These were not the actions of a man overwhelmed with grief or panic. They were the actions of someone intent on covering up a crime. The most devastating evidence came from Grace's final moments. Captured on CCTV, prosecutors replayed the footage of Grace and Jesse together on their date. She was smiling, trusting, enjoying what she believed was just another night in the city. Within hours, she would be gone for Grace's parents, who sat through the proceedings. The pain was unimaginable at one point. The defense's claims about consensual sex were so disturbing that her mother broke down in court after a 2-week trial. The jury deliberated for just 5 hours on November 22, 2019. Jesse Kempson was found guilty of murder. The verdict was delivered on what would have been Grace's 23rd birthday. The courtroom fell silent outside. The news spread across New Zealand and back to the UK, where Grace's friends and family grieved not only her loss, but also the harrowing way her story had been twisted during the trial. At sentencing in February 2020, the judge called Kempson's actions depraved and selfish, highlighting his total lack of remorse. Jesse Kempson was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years for the Millen family. No sentence could bring their daughter back, but the guilty verdict ensured that her name would not be defined by Jesse Kempson's lies. While New Zealand media outlets were legally barred from publishing Jesse Kempson's name due to strict identity suppression laws, international outlets faced no such restrictions. Newspapers and television channels in the UK and other countries began reporting his name openly. On January 16, 2019, Kempson appeared in the Auckland High Court, where he pleaded not guilty to the charge of murder. His name remained suppressed pending an appeal. but on February 7, 2019, the court overturned the suppression order, indirectly ending the secrecy surrounding his identity. The trial officially began on November 4, 2019 in court. The autopsy report was presented, and its findings were devastating. Grace had been strangled, with evidence of bruises on her arms and chest, injuries suggesting she had been forcibly restrained. Medical experts testified that considerable pressure had been applied to her neck for nearly 5 minutes, causing her death. A prosecution revealed chilling evidence about Jesse's behavior after the murder. Despite his claims that he had fallen asleep in the shower after Grace died, forensic analysis proved otherwise that night. He made disturbing Google searches on his phone, looking up hottest fire, flesh-eating birds, and the Waitakere Ranges, the remote area where her body was eventually discovered. Even more horrifying, he had taken intimate photographs of Grace's body and browsed pornographic websites, showing no sign of panic or remorse. Prosecutors argued Grace's death was not a tragic accident during consensual intimacy, as Kempson claimed, but a deliberate, intentional act carried out with a calm, chilling calculation. Investigators even testified that if it had not been Grace that night, Jesse Kempson would likely have targeted another woman. On November 22, 2019, after deliberating for just 5 hours, a jury of 5 men and 7 women unanimously found Jesse Kempson guilty of murder on February 21, 2020. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. Months later, on December 22, 2020, Kempson was formally identified after the Supreme Court of New Zealand rejected his final appeal to keep his name suppressed. It was then revealed to the public that he had also been convicted of a further 9 charges, including rape, sexual violation, and threatening to kill, crimes committed against other women. Grace's murder drew international attention and sparked urgent conversations about violence against women. Even New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, publicly apologized to Grace's family, expressing the nation's sorrow and grief following the verdict. The Millen family delivered an emotional statement. They said that while they welcomed the guilty verdict, it could never lessen the pain of losing Grace. They described her as a beautiful, talented, and loving daughter, the sunshine of their family, whose memory would live on forever. This was the case of Grace Millan's story. 2 on April 22, 2012, at 9:35 am. A chilling 911 call was placed by a terrified 10-year-old boy. His voice trembled as he told the dispatcher a horrifying truth. His parents and 3 older brothers were dead. Police rushed to a home on Mirage Street in Yukon, Oklahoma, and discovered a scene that left even seasoned investigators shaken. Inside the house lay 5 members of the Caney family, all victims of gunfire. Among the dead was the father, 42-year-old Jonathan Caney. But soon, detectives uncovered something even more disturbing. Jonathan himself had pulled the trigger. This is the case of the Caney family murders, a crime that left behind chilling unanswered questions. Why would a husband and father mercilessly murder his wife and 3 of his children, yet spare the life of his youngest son? The Caneys were seen as a model American family. Jonathan and his wife, 39-year-old Lindsay Terry Caney, were well liked in their community, raising 4 sons: Dylan, 18, Ethan, 14, Lucas, 12, and their youngest, just 10 years old. Jonathan worked part-time at a Paycom Center, a venue that hosted major sports and entertainment events, including the home games of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Friends described him as a fun-loving man, someone who always showed gratitude and shared hugs freely. His wife Lindsay was equally warm and outgoing, known for her ability to light up any room. Their children, much like their parents, were friendly, well-loved, and active in their community. Dylan, Ethan, and Lucas were described as energetic and bright, making the family a favorite among neighbors and friends. Lindsay's childhood friend, Cammie Cruz, remembered her as someone who carried her Oklahoma roots with pride, and whose personality left a lasting impact wherever she went. But behind this picture of a happy, loving family lay a darkness no one could have predicted. The Candys were mired in their community, not just for their warmth, but for the way they embraced life. Their home was always open to friends, and their children were known for their kindness and enthusiasm. So, when news broke that Jonathan had killed his wife Lindsay, along with 3 of their sons, the shock was indescribably. Investigators searched for explanations. They combed through the family's financial records, employment history, and Jonathan's past, but there were no clear signs of stress, abuse, or hidden turmoil that might explain the massacre. The surviving child, just 10 years old, had woken to the sound of gunshots and discovered the unimaginable: his entire family gone. Except for him. His 911 call would forever haunt those who listened to it in interviews. Police admitted that what made the case so chilling was not just the crime itself, but the complete lack of answers. Why had Jonathan killed everyone except his youngest son? Was it mercy? Was it part of some plan that ended too soon? Or was it something darker, an impulsive act fueled by a mental break no one had seen coming? The autopsy reports provided grim details. Each victim had been shot with precision, suggesting this was not random or frenzied, but carried out with intent. Authorities confirmed that, after killing Lindsay and their 3 boys, Jonathan turned the gun on himself. He left behind no note, no explanation, no justification, only questions for friends, neighbors, and relatives. The tragedy was impossible to process. Vigils were held across Yukon, Oklahoma, as hundreds gathered to mourn the loss of a family they had loved. The youngest child, the sole survivor, was surrounded by extended relatives who stepped in to give him the care and stability he desperately needed. The Candy family murders left behind a chilling mystery without a clear motive. The community was left to speculate. Some believed Jonathan had been hiding silent struggles with mental illness. Others thought there might have been financial or personal pressures no one knew about, but, in truth, no answer ever came. The case was officially closed as a murder-suicide, leaving behind only sorrow and a child forced to grow up carrying the memory of that day. The Candys had once built their lives in Mustang, Oklahoma, before later moving to Yukon. Their eldest son, Dylan, had just graduated from Mustang High School and was attending Oklahoma Baptist University. Music was his passion. He could play multiple instruments and had been a drummer in the Mustang High School band at university. He carried that love forward as part of the Bison Brigade. Teachers and friends alike described Dylan as someone with a generous heart, always ready to help others. The family's second child, 14-year-old Ethan, was a rising star on the baseball field. He played for Mustang North High School, and his teammates and coaches admired him for his competitiveness, leadership, and positivity. Coach T.J. Armstrong even said Ethan had become his own son's best friend, a boy who carried light into every situation. Younger still, was full of boundless energy. He was bright in school, loved being outdoors, and often joined his brothers in sports. Friends remembered him as affectionate and lively, always smiling, always running from the outside. The Candy family appeared to be a picture of happiness, a close-knit household filled with talent, laughter, and love. But on April 22, 2024, that illusion shattered. That morning, the youngest child, the only one who would survive, woke as he always did, expecting another day with his parents and brothers. The steady hum of the fan in his room muffled any sound beyond his door. When he finally stepped out around 9 a.m., nothing could have prepared him for what he would see. Fire alarm had briefly blared, then fallen silent. The house was unnaturally quiet, and then he saw it. The floor spattered with blood, his family lying lifeless in pools of red, his parents and 3 brothers, Dylan, Ethan, and Lucas, all dead. Each had been shot. In shock and terror, the boy dialed 911 through panic and tears. He told dispatchers that his entire family had been murdered. When police and emergency workers arrived, even they were shaken. It looked like a massacre at first, Investigators considered the possibility of an intruder, but the evidence soon pointed to something far more harrowing. A gun was found near the body of Jonathan Candy. The father, he too had a gunshot wound to the head. And suddenly, the truth was unavoidable. Jonathan was the killer. Why he had done it remained unclear. Police called in forensic psychologist Dr. Joni Johnston to examine Jonathan's behavior and writings. Her report suggested he may have suffered from severe depression and psychosis. Carefully hidden beneath a mask of humor and cheer, Jonathan, she explained, had long pretended to be a fun-loving man, when inside he was carrying an unbearable psychological weight. Dr. Johnston's analysis noted that depression often looks different in men, less likely to be spoken aloud, more likely to be buried under silence until it erupts in catastrophic ways. In Jonathan's case, his diary entries painted a darker picture, a man feeling overwhelmed, trapped, and unable to share his suffering with those around him. Social expectations only worsened the pressure. He was expected to be strong, to provide, to never falter, and yet, in the midst of his violence, he made one choice that left investigators haunted. He spared his youngest son. No one knows why. Was it last minute remorse, a bond stronger than the others, or a chilling calculation? Authorities could only speculate. In the days after the murders, the community gathered to remember the lives lost. Ethan's baseball team, the Mustang Misfits, organized a vigil there. Rhonda Armstrong, wife of Coach T.J. Armstrong, stood in disbelief. Her son had been Ethan's closest friend, and the families had shared years of friendship with the Candys. Now, she said, the news felt impossible to grasp, as though a piece of their world had been ripped away overnight. Local news outlets reported that the souls of each victim radiated a rare brightness. Friends and neighbors remembered how the Candy family always seemed to be smiling, always laughing, and how their presence could wash away the troubles of anyone around them. Rhonda Armstrong, whose son had played baseball alongside Ethan, said the Candys were the kindest, sweetest family she had ever known. To her, they weren't just neighbors, they were joy itself. Others echoed her words. Cammie Cruz, one of Lindsay Candy's closest friends, posted a heartbreaking tribute on Facebook. She wrote that the news was devastating and unimaginable, admitting she had been in tears, unable to process it. Lindsay, she said, was loved by everyone she met, a woman who brought laughter and light into every conversation she had, a way of making people feel at home, treating her friends' children as if they were her own. Rhonda recalled how Lindsay had always looked after her son Cooper like a second mother, the kind of person who would give you the shirt off her back without hesitation. The community also grieved the loss of Dylan Candy. The eldest son. Friends remembered him as fiercely devoted to his brothers, never missing Ethan's games, always encouraging them to do their best. Becky Young Horton, one of Dylan's former choir teachers, described him as an incredible young man with a big heart at Oklahoma Baptist University, where Dylan was a freshman and a drummer in the Bison Brigade. His professors and peers called him a natural leader. Brian Stackhouse, director of athletic bands, said Dylan had been placed on one of the most challenging drum parts almost immediately, a testament to his talent. He remembered Dylan as someone who remained cheerful even on hard days, friendly, social, and endlessly resilient. One of Dylan's proudest moments had come at band camp in August 2023, when the drumline rehearsed a new cadence he hadn't known. It featured a solo for him, and his surprise and excitement became a story the band would never forget. After his death, the Bison Brigade retired his bass drum and uniform, and a memorial was established in his honor on campus. Ethan, the 14-year-old middle child, was remembered just as warmly. Coaches described him as the kind of kid who could brighten anyone's day with a smile. His closest friend was Cooper Armstrong, son of Coach T.J. Armstrong. Their bond was so strong that teammates called them the twins. Coach Armstrong said Ethan was his sweet little Candyman, a boy who never stopped smiling, who made every practice lighter, and who became like family to them. To honor his memory, the Mustang Youth Baseball League announced plans to dedicate a memorial bench at Mustang High School in Ethan's name. And then there was Lucas, the youngest victim. Just 12 years old, friends called him Luke, too young to join his brothers on the field. He could often be seen playing with the younger siblings of other athletes during practices and games. He was described as affectionate, playful, and full of energy, the kind of boy whose laughter carried across the park amid these tributes. Police turned their focus back to Jonathan Candy, the father who had committed the murders. Investigators called in forensic psychologist Dr. Joni Johnston to study his behavior and writings. Her findings were unsettling. Dr. Johnston concluded that Jonathan may have suffered from severe depression and psychosis, but had hidden it behind a mask of humor and charm outwardly. He seemed like a fun, light-hearted man, always ready to joke, always present at his children's games inwardly. However, he carried a crushing weight. Her report highlighted how depression in men often looks different from depression in women. Men, she explained, are less likely to share their pain openly. Instead, they bury it, suppress it, and pretend everything is fine until the pressure becomes unbearable. Jonathan's diary revealed just how heavy that burden had become. Entry after entry reflected his growing despair about his role as a father and husband, a man drowning in negativity he could not voice aloud from the outside. He seemed like a devoted family man, but within those private pages, investigators saw the truth, a man collapsing under the weight of his own mind. It later came to light that Jonathan's case was not unique. There have been other instances where a parent, weighed down by financial strain and mental health struggles, resorted to the unthinkable, taking the lives of their own family. One of the most infamous examples is that of John List, a man who shocked the nation back in 1971. On November 9, 1971, List methodically killed his entire immediate family inside their New Jersey home. He first shot his 47-year-old wife, Helen, and then his 84-year-old mother, Alma, hours later, when his younger children's 16-year-old, Patricia, and 13-year-old Fred home from school. He murdered them as well, but he didn't stop there. That same evening, List drove to his eldest son, John Jr.'s soccer game, picked him up, and upon returning home, shot him too. When investigators pieced together the motive, they discovered that John List had been fired from his job at a Jersey City bank months earlier. Rather than admit his failure to his family or community, he continued to dress in a suit every morning, leaving home as if he still had work. Financial ruin and the loss of his social standing gnawed at him. To List, killing his family was, in his own warped reasoning, a way of sparing them from the shame of poverty. What made the John List case even more chilling was the meticulous planning he put into the murders. After killing his family, he carefully arranged their bodies on sleeping bags in the ballroom of their mansion, except for his mother, who was left in the attic. He then cleaned up, wrote a confession letter to his pastor, and cut himself out of every family photograph in the house to make it harder for police to track him down before leaving. List also turned down the thermostat, left the lights on, and even stopped the milk and newspaper deliveries to outsiders. It looked like the family had simply gone on vacation. In reality, 5 bodies lay inside the Grand Victorian home, undiscovered for nearly a month, until neighbors began to question the silence. When police entered the mansion, they were stunned. The eerie sound of organ music echoed through the house. John had left a religious broadcast playing on repeat in his confession. He claimed that killing his family was an act of mercy, sparing them from poverty and ensuring their souls would go to heaven. For nearly 18 years, John List lived as a fugitive, starting a new life under a different identity in Virginia. He even remarried and built a seemingly respectable reputation in his new community. His capture only came in 1989 after the case was featured on America's Most Wanted, and a neighbor recognized him by then. The murders had become one of the most infamous family annihilation cases in American history. The parallels between List and Jonathan Candy are difficult to ignore. Both men were deeply troubled by financial struggles and an overwhelming sense of failure. Both felt trapped by the expectation that they had to provide for their families at all costs, and in both cases, The result was the destruction of an entire household. But there was one key difference. While John List murdered every member of his family without hesitation, Jonathan Candy spared his youngest son. Investigators still question whether this was the result of last-minute remorse, or if he shared a bond with the boy that stayed his hand with his family, still believing he had a steady job. John List continued his daily routine of waking up early and pretending to go to work, even though he had long since been unemployed as time passed. The family's financial problems worsened at one point. List even resorted to withdrawing money from his elderly mother's bank account just to cover the mortgage and prevent foreclosure. A court-appointed psychologist later testified that, when faced with his situation, List saw only two options: either apply for welfare and endure the humiliation of public assistance, or kill his family to end their suffering in his mind. Taking welfare was so shameful that it became the very reason he chose to murder on April 12, 1990. John List was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. He denied personal responsibility, claiming that his mental state had overpowered his judgment. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. List later appealed, arguing that post-traumatic stress disorder had impaired his decision-making. But the court rejected his claims and upheld his conviction in the case of Jonathan Candy. Investigators reached a similar conclusion about the role of mental illness. According to Master Sergeant Gary Knight of the Oklahoma City Police Department, detectives halted further inquiry once they understood that Candy's actions stemmed from his deteriorating mental health. The tragedy of the Candy family remains one of the most harrowing cases imaginable. Jonathan Candy, overwhelmed by depression and other untreated psychological struggles, chose silence rather than seeking help. That silence cost the lives of his wife and 3 sons, innocent victims with bright futures ahead of them. And though his youngest child survived, he was left carrying a trauma so profound that it would follow him for a lifetime. Story 3. In July 2023, police rushed to a home after receiving a disturbing tip. A man's life was in imminent danger. The alleged mastermind behind the threat was his own wife, Lindsay Shiver, who, according to investigators, had been plotting his murder. The chilling piece of evidence: a WhatsApp message she allegedly sent to her lover containing just 2 words: "Kill him." Lindsay Shiver was born on October 8, 1986, in Dothan, Alabama. To her parents, Andy and Cecilia, she grew up with 2 brothers, Brandon and Craig. In many ways, Lindsay's upbringing was steeped in the traditions of Southern culture. Beauty pageants were a staple of life in her community, and Lindsay eagerly took part, competing across Alabama. Her bright blue eyes, glossy blonde hair, and radiant stage presence helped her stand out, earning her the crown of Miss Houston County. By the age of 19, she also secured the runner-up position at the National Peanut Festival, where she proudly wore a crown adorned with a golden peanut. In 2006, Lindsay enrolled at Auburn University, a prestigious college in Alabama, where she pursued a degree in elementary education with the dream of becoming a teacher. During her time there, she quickly became known as popular and outgoing. She joined the cheerleading team, embodying the spirit of the Auburn Tigers. It was during an exercise class that Lindsay met Robert Shiver, a football player for the Auburn Tigers. Robert was a talented long snapper who had risen from being a walk-on to earning a scholarship and eventually becoming team captain. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and they soon became inseparable. The classic pairing of the cheerleader and the football star. Robert's career appeared to be on the fast track. After graduation, he signed with the NFL's Atlanta Falcons as a free agent in 2010. That same year, he proposed to Lindsay, and the two were married in 2011. From the outside, their life looked picture perfect. They welcomed 3 sons, Grayson, Landon, and Rhett, and built a lifestyle that seemed enviable to anyone who knew them. But Robert's NFL career never took off, as he hoped. His contract with the Falcons was cut short, forcing him to pivot. Determined, he reinvented himself in the corporate world, Becoming the vice president of senior life insurance company, his new career flourished, bringing in a substantial income. Lindsay, in turn, embraced the role of a stay-at-home mother, raising their 3 boys, while also enjoying the luxury his success provided. The Shivers lived lavishly. They joined country clubs, dined at high-end restaurants, and traveled frequently. One of their favorite escapes was to the Bahamas, particularly to Baker's Bay, an exclusive private island retreat frequented by celebrities, and the ultra-wealthy Robert's billionaire parents owned a residence there, providing the family access to one of the most opulent communities in the Caribbean with its pristine beaches, turquoise waters, and gated luxury. Baker's Bay became the backdrop of what looked like a dream life for the Shiver family. Emotionally and mentally, she argued that years of being a stay-at-home mother had cost her career opportunities, making her financially dependent on Robert. In her filing, she demanded that he shoulder her debts and provide ongoing support. Divorce quickly devolved into a bitter war. Robert claimed Lindsay had carried on her affair while still married, while Lindsay insisted her relationship with Ternan began only after their separation and with Robert's knowledge, despite their decade of marriage and 3 children. Reconciliation was impossible. Their legal battles spiraled into accusations, denials, and open hostility, all while the couple continued living under the same roof in Thomasville, North Carolina. By July 16, 2023, tensions reached a boiling point that evening. Lindsay called police to report a violent altercation, but when officers arrived, the story they uncovered was far less dramatic and far more petty. The couple had been arguing over the use of the family's private jet. Lindsay wanted to fly to the Bahamas to see Tern, while Robert insisted he would be using the jet to take their sons there instead. At the last minute, Lindsay declared that she would also board the plane, but not to Key West, as originally planned. Instead, she announced she was flying straight to the Bahamas to meet her lover. Refused as a father and a husband, he told her bluntly that he would not allow the family jet to be used for such a purpose. His refusal sent Lindsay into a rage. Police officers who witnessed the exchange noted the immaturity of the argument, but what none of them could predict was just how dark things were about to get later. That night, consumed by anger and humiliation, Lindsay reached out to turn on what, in a chilling move, she sent him a photo of Robert, along with 2 words that would change everything: kill him. Days later, chaos erupted in Baker's Bay Grabber Bar and Grill, the very place Lindsay and Ternan had first met. Was robbed. The thieves came prepared, cutting power cables and disabling generators to shut down the security cameras there. Inside knowledge was uncanny. They seemed to know exactly where to strike and how to avoid being caught. As investigators dug deeper, one disturbing question began to surface. Was this robbery simply a crime of opportunity, or part of something much darker connected to Lindsay, Tern, and their escalating plot against Robert? Investigators initially believed the restaurant break-in was nothing more than a robbery, but the evidence soon suggested otherwise. The thieves had deliberately shut off the generator, a sign that they had conducted careful reconnaissance beforehand. Detectives quickly concluded this was an inside job, most likely carried out by someone employed at the restaurant. As part of the inquiry, police questioned staff members, including Terrence. When they searched his phone, they uncovered a chilling clue: a WhatsApp message sent 4 days earlier by his girlfriend, Lindsay. The message contained just 2 words: kill him. Detectives believed the ominous text referred to Lindsay's estranged husband, Robert. What started as a burglary investigation had suddenly turned into something much darker, according to Bahamian authorities. Lindsay was allegedly involved in a plot to have Robert targeted at his family's home in Baker's Bay. Fearing for his life, Robert immediately flew back to the United States with his 3 children. The idea that Lindsay, a mother of 3, could have been planning her husband's murder in front of, or near, their children was almost unthinkable. Still, the law is clear: all parties remain innocent until proven guilty. On July 21st, Lindsay, Terrence, and another alleged co-conspirator, Fen, were arrested and taken into custody in Nassau, all 3 pleaded not guilty. Represented by the same attorney, Lindsay's arrest marked a stunning downfall. Once a beauty pageant contestant who had lived a life of wealth and privilege, private jets, luxury homes, in elite social circles, she suddenly found herself locked inside Fox Hill Prison in the Bahamas. The facility is notorious for its harsh and often inhumane conditions. Reports over the years have exposed severe overcrowding, maggot infestations, rats, untreated bed sores, and a lack of basic hygiene supplies, like toilet paper. Prisoners were often given little outdoor time, and cells were described as stifling and unsanitary for Lindsay. The adjustment would have been jarring. The woman who had once been surrounded by opulence was now reduced to using a bucket in place of a toilet. We can only imagine how she coped with such a drastic reversal of fortune. On August 9, 2023, Lindsay was released from Fox Hill after posting $100,000 bail. Terrence and Fenn were also granted bail, set at $220,000 each, but Lindsay's freedom came with heavy restrictions. She was fitted with an ankle monitor, required to report to police 3 times a week, and placed under a strict curfew. Her passport was surrendered to the U.S. Embassy, preventing her from leaving the Bahamas until her next court hearing, scheduled for October 5. Following her release, Lindsay gave a brief interview to the New York Post. "It's been really rough," she admitted, though she declined to go into detail given the ongoing legal proceedings. When October arrived, her attorneys requested that the case be expedited, but prosecutors argued that they had not yet completed the voluntary bill of indictment. The hearing was postponed to December. During that December session, Lindsay pleaded with the judge to allow her to return to Alabama for Christmas with her children. The judge granted her request, but with strict conditions. She had to remain under GPS monitoring, was barred from leaving Alabama, except for divorce or custody proceedings in Georgia, and had to remain compliant with all court orders. For Lindsay, this was a small victory. For Robert, however, it was terrifying. He strongly opposed her return to the United States, telling the court he feared for his safety. His concerns were understandable, given the nature of the allegations. Lindsay's defense team, meanwhile, painted a very different picture. They insisted she was innocent, a victim of false accusations and manipulation by Robert Zill. They argued the evidence against her was flimsy, and that she had been unfairly targeted. As the case dragged on, tensions only grew. In January 2024, Lindsay accused Robert of denying her access to their 3 sons. Her lawyers claimed she had not spoken to them since a FaceTime call on Christmas. They also alleged that Robert had cut her off financially, leaving her vulnerable as she awaited trial. The trial was originally scheduled for March 6, 2024, but fate intervened yet again. A Bahamian judge postponed the proceedings first to the summer, and later to March 2025. Extending the limbo for everyone involved. While out on bail and living in the U.S., Lindsay began making media appearances. She sat down with Inside Edition and Good Morning America, where she discussed the case from her perspective while living in the United States on bail. Lindsay made several media appearances to tell her side of the story. She spoke with Inside Edition and Good Morning America, explaining the personal toll the allegations had taken on her life. She described the past months as emotionally exhausting and expressed frustration at being separated from her children, though she refrained from discussing specifics about the alleged murder plot. Citing the ongoing legal proceedings, public reaction to her story was intense. On one side, some sympathized with her position as a mother navigating a bitter divorce, while facing serious criminal charges. On the other, critics condemned her alleged actions, unable to reconcile the image of a devoted mother with the shocking messages sent to her lover. Social media platforms erupted with debates about privilege, morality, and justice, with many weighing in on whether her wealth and status had influenced how the case was handled. Meanwhile, Robert Shiver focused on securing custody of their children and maintaining their safety. Legal experts noted the delicate balance the courts had to maintain, ensuring Lindsay's constitutional rights while protecting the welfare of the children. and the integrity of the criminal investigation as March 2025 approached. Lindsay's attorneys prepared for the trial. Their strategy emphasized inconsistencies in the prosecution's evidence and framed Lindsay as a mother unjustly accused. They argued that the WhatsApp message, while alarming, did not constitute a concrete plot and was open to interpretation. Prosecutors, on the other hand, painted a darker narrative. They highlighted the message, Lindsay's prior actions, and her relationship with Terrence, portraying a calculated plan to end her husband's life. They stressed the potential danger to the children, amplifying the severity of the charges and underscoring the stakes of the trial throughout this period. Lindsay's life had changed dramatically. From lavish vacations on private islands and a life of luxury, she had been thrust into a situation of extreme scrutiny and restriction. The shift from opulence to legal entanglement, media attention, and confinement, even under house arrest. Conditions underscored the profound personal consequences of the allegations. As the trial date drew near, public interest only intensified. News outlets followed every development, from pre-trial motions to custody hearings, framing the case as a high-stakes drama involving wealth, betrayal, and alleged criminal intent. Legal analysts speculated on potential outcomes, noting that the combination of Lindsay's social status, public visibility, and the sensational nature of the charges made this one of the most closely watched criminal cases in recent Bahamian history. The stage was set, a courtroom showdown that would test not only the evidence and testimonies but also the public's perception of justice, family loyalty, and the boundaries of personal betrayal. Lindsay Shivers' public appearances drew the attention of the judiciary. The blatant disregard for the conditions of her bail enraged the presiding judge, who ordered her to return immediately to the Bahamas and to Fox Hill Prison. Her bond was revoked after she was accused of violating bail conditions by moving from her designated address at her parents' home in Alabama without prior approval. Meanwhile, Robert Shiver, seemingly freed from imminent danger, found comfort in a new relationship with reality television star Savannah Crisley. Savannah, an American TV personality and entrepreneur, first rose to fame with her family on the reality series Crisley Knows Best, which followed the lives of her brother Chase, and their parents Todd and Julie Crisley. In an interview with People magazine, Savannah described her relationship with Robert as great, and shared that everything between them was going awesome. Interestingly, Savannah's own family had experienced legal troubles in the past, as both her parents had been convicted and imprisoned for bank and tax fraud. Robert and Savannah went public with their relationship in November 2023, sharing intimate moments on Instagram, and appeared to be embracing a life of happiness together. Even as Lindsay's case continued to unfold. Story 4. The Banfield family case. On February 24, 2023, at approximately 7:40 a.m., a 911 call came from a home in Herndon, Virginia. The dispatcher heard only muffled moans before the line abruptly ended. 15 minutes later, a second call was received. A man claimed he had shot an intruder attacking his wife. When police arrived, they discovered a horrifying scene. Christine Banfield, stabbed multiple times, and a man, Joseph Ryan, dead from 2 gunshot wounds. What began as a possible home invasion quickly spiraled into a case of betrayal, manipulation, and murder. Investigators soon uncovered forensic evidence, digital footprints, and personal connections that raised troubling questions. Why would a husband conspire with the family nanny to kill his wife, the mother of his child? Who exactly was the intruder, and what role did he play in this deadly plot? Juliana Perez Majes, born in Brazil, moved to Virginia at age 21 through a cultural exchange program, working as an au pair for American families. In late 2021, she began employment with Brendan and Christine Banfield, taking on household duties and caring for their young daughter. Over time, Brendan reportedly developed a personal interest in Juliana, and their relationship extended beyond professional boundaries, a factor that would play a crucial role in the tragic events that followed Brendan Banfield. born in February 1985, had been employed as an IRS agent since 2009, handling sensitive financial investigations. Christine Banfield, also born in 1985, was a pediatric ICU nurse, requiring both medical expertise and emotional resilience. The couple, along with their daughter, born in 2018, moved from Long Island, New York, to Herndon, Virginia, in 2019, purchasing a 5-bedroom home for $799,000 to accommodate their growing family on the morning of February 24, 2023. At 7:47 a.m., the first 911 call was placed from the Banfield residence, though the dispatcher could hear only moaning before the line cut off at 8:02 a.m. A second call was made. This time Juliana requested assistance, while Brendan claimed he had shot an intruder attacking his wife. When officers arrived, they found Christine Banfield, 37, in the master bedroom, stabbed multiple times. Joseph Ryan, 38, lay dead from gunshot wounds. Christine was rushed to the hospital, but was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. While Joseph was pronounced dead at the scene, investigators began scrutinizing Juliana's account. She claimed she had left the residence to take the Banfield's daughter to the National Zoo, but returned after realizing she had forgotten packed lunches. She reported seeing an unfamiliar vehicle and a man entering the house with a bag. Observations that raised suspicion. Juliana attempted to contact Christine, but received no answer, prompting her to call Brendan. Brendan allegedly returned home with Juliana, who placed the child in the basement for safety. Upon entering the master bedroom, they claimed to see Joseph Ryan holding a knife to Christine's throat. Brendan reportedly fired his service weapon once, after which he instructed Juliana to retrieve a Glock pistol from a gun safe. Juliana fired a shot that struck Joseph in the chest. The conflicting accounts of Juliana and Brendan raised major doubts. Investigators questioned the authenticity of their statements and began probing further into the events that morning. Key questions remained. Who was Joseph Ryan, and why was he at the Banfield residence? What was his purpose, and what had triggered the deadly confrontation? As detectives dug deeper, the story became increasingly complex, revealing a tangled web of deceit, manipulation, and fatal case that would shock the community and challenge assumptions about trust, family, and loyalty. Investigators delved into the connections between the two parties, uncovering details that made the case far more complex. They discovered that Joseph Ryan was an active user of FetLife, an online BDSM community operating under the username Taco Supreme 7000. Ryan frequently engaged in discussions about his experiences and preferences within alternative sexual lifestyles. His profile indicated an openness to unconventional relationships, a significant aspect of his personal life. Further investigation revealed that Ryan had been communicating with a user named Anastasia9, whose profile picture was Christine Banfield's. These interactions would prove pivotal in understanding the events leading to the tragedy at the Banfield residence. The messages suggested that Ryan had been lured under false pretenses, believing he was arranging a consensual encounter with Christine. However, evidence indicated otherwise. Investigators immediately questioned whether Christine herself had operated the profile, or if someone was impersonating her. To clarify, they analyzed the content of the messages and compared it to Christine's typical writing style. To everyone's shock, the tone and style of Anastasia9's messages were inconsistent with Christine's usual communication. This discrepancy strongly suggested that someone had deliberately crafted the messages to deceive Ryan, leading him to believe he was interacting with Christine. The impersonation played a crucial role in the investigation. It showed a premeditated effort to lure Ryan into the Banfield home, with messages containing details designed to appear authentic to him. This revelation highlighted the manipulative planning behind Ryan's presence on February 24, 2023, and raised questions about the motives driving the scheme. As investigators dug deeper, forensic analysis uncovered further startling evidence that shifted the investigation. Dramatically, blood from Christine Banfield's body had been deliberately smeared onto Joseph Ryan's body after his death, suggesting an attempt to frame him as the attacker. Blood spatter patterns and DNA analysis confirmed that the blood found on Ryan was indeed Christine's. This deliberate tampering painted a chilling picture of someone orchestrating a false narrative about Ryan's presence in the home. The combination of the fake profile and the manipulation of evidence revealed a much more complicated scenario than initially believed. All attention now focused on Juliana and Brendan, both of whom insisted their actions had been in self-defense. 2 months of investigation. Law enforcement turned their attention to Juliana in October 2023. She was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and use of a firearm in connection with Joseph Ryan's death. The decision to charge her stemmed from her presence at the scene during critical moments and the conflicting accounts she provided. Her story, including leaving the Banfield home to take the daughter to the zoo and returning for forgotten lunches, did not align with forensic evidence collected at the crime scene. The deliberate attempt to frame Ryan by smearing Christine's blood further implicated her. On October 15, 2023, officers arrested Juliana at her residence without incident. They explained the charges and her rights, while Juliana maintained her innocence, asserting she had acted out of fear for her life and to protect Christine from an intruder. She was then transported to a local detention facility to await further legal proceedings. Juliana's initial court appearance was scheduled shortly after her arrest. During this hearing, prosecutors presented evidence that included the forensic findings and details of her communications on the day of the incident. They argued that Juliana had acted with reckless disregard for human life, actively escalating a situation that ultimately ended in violence. As the case unfolded, investigators continued gathering evidence and preparing for trials. So why wasn't Brendan arrested at this stage? Law enforcement initially viewed Brendan's shooting of Joseph Ryan as an act of self-defense, according to his claims. Ryan, the alleged intruder, posed an immediate threat, and if Brendan had not acted swiftly, Ryan could have killed Christine with the knife he held. In contrast, Juliana's deliberate attempt to shoot Ryan after he had already been shot by Brendan was interpreted as second-degree murder. Once Juliana was in custody, investigators turned their focus to Brendan, though initially there was insufficient evidence to charge him. However, further investigation revealed a shocking development in August 2022. Juliana Perizic-Kesh had moved into the Banfield home as a live-in nanny. This arrangement had sparked an affair between her and Brendan, evolving quickly as they grew closer amidst the responsibilities of family life. By October 2023, investigators uncovered evidence of this relationship, raising suspicions about potential motives behind the murders. During a search of Brendan's bedroom, authorities found framed photos of Brendan and Juliana, alongside Juliana's lingerie, proof of a personal relationship that went well beyond professional boundaries. This evidence not only exposed the illicit affair, but also provided a critical link in establishing Brendan's potential involvement in the crimes. The affair became a central element of the investigation, influencing how detectives reconstructed the events of February 24, 2023. In mid-February, just weeks before the tragedy, Brendan purchased a Glock pistol from a shooting range, a transaction that immediately raised red flags, particularly given its proximity to the homicides. Investigators also discovered that both Brendan and Juliana had recently traded in their phones for new devices. The timing suggested a possible attempt to erase communications that might connect them to premeditated actions. As authorities worked to establish a clear timeline, they monitored Juliana's communications. While she remained in custody, phone calls between Juliana and Brendan were tapped, a standard technique in high-profile cases where suspect interactions could provide critical evidence. During one recorded conversation, Juliana expressed concern over their relationship, telling Brendan, "I hope you are not just staying with me because you are afraid of me turning against you." Her words indicated her awareness of their precarious situation and hinted at the potential consequences of their actions, Brendan's response was equally telling. He allegedly instructed her to keep her mouth shut, a directive that suggested he was attempting to control the narrative and prevent her from revealing information that could implicate him. Finally, in September 2024, Brendan Banfield was arrested following an extensive 11-month investigation. Detectives had gathered substantial evidence linking him to the deaths of Joseph Ryan and Christine Banfield, including forensic findings, inconsistencies in his statements, and other incriminating information. Brendan was taken into custody at his residence without incident. He faced serious legal repercussions, with primary charges including aggravated murder and the use of a firearm during the commission of a felony. The aggravated murder charge related specifically to the circumstances surrounding Joseph Ryan's death on February 24, 2023, with prosecutors arguing that Brendan's actions reflected premeditation and reckless disregard for human life. The firearm charge underscored the severity of the offense, emphasizing not only the unlawful taking of life, but also the heightened danger involved in using a weapon during the crime. With Brendan in custody and Juliana already facing charges, the focus shifted to the courtroom. The trial for both defendants became one of the most closely watched cases in Herndon, Virginia, drawing intense media scrutiny and public attention. Prosecutors painted a damning picture, asserting that both Juliana and Brendan had manipulated events to orchestrate a deadly encounter that led to the deaths of Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan. The prosecution emphasized the premeditation involved in the affair, the purchase of firearms, and the suspicious phone exchanges just days before the incident. They argued that Brendan's decision to buy a Glock and the couple's simultaneous replacement of their phones suggested a coordinated effort to cover their tracks further. The staged communications on FetLife, where Joseph Ryan had been lured under false pretenses, highlighted an elaborate plan to draw him into a dangerous situation. Evidence from forensic analysts became a pivotal component of the case. Blood spatter patterns, DNA analysis, and the deliberate smearing of Christine's blood on Ryan's body all suggested an attempt to mislead investigators and construct a false narrative. Prosecutors argued that Juliana's actions, particularly firing at Ryan after he had already been shot, went beyond self-defense and amounted to second-degree murder. The defense team for both Juliana and Brendan worked to counter these claims. Juliana's lawyers insisted she had acted in fear for her life and that of Christine, framing her actions as reactive rather than premeditated. Brendan's defense argued that he had acted in the heat of the moment, attempting to save his wife from imminent danger. They claimed that the affair, while inappropriate, was irrelevant to the events that led to the confrontation. During witness testimony, investigators and forensic experts laid out the chilling timeline, from Juliana's return to the Banfield home with forgotten lunches, to Brendan's confrontation with Ryan, and the eventual gunshots fired. Digital evidence including WhatsApp messages, phone records, and online communications demonstrated the complex web of relationships and manipulations that had entangled all parties. As the trial progressed, the jury was presented with a series of difficult questions. Was Joseph Ryan truly an intruder, acting with malicious intent, or had he been lured into a trap? To what extent were Juliana and Brendan responsible for orchestrating the events that led to his death and Christine's murder? Did the pre-existing affair and attempts to cover tracks indicate calculated criminal behavior? Or were they coincidental factors in a chaotic, emotional confrontation? The courtroom became a tense arena where narratives clashed. The prosecution sought to prove deliberate planning and manipulation, while the defense painted a picture of fear, confusion, and reactive self-preservation. Media coverage of the trial only intensified the pressure, as the public followed each hearing closely, debating who was guilty and to what degree. By the conclusion of the trial's first phase, it was evident that the case was far from straightforward. Both defendants faced a potential life sentence if convicted, yet questions of motive, premeditation, and the dynamics between Juliana Brendan and the victim loomed large. The trial also exposed deeper societal issues, the vulnerability of domestic workers, the dangers of online deception, and how personal relationships can escalate into deadly outcomes as the jury prepared to deliberate. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every expert analysis would weigh heavily on their decision. The case of Juliana Perez Mages and Brendan Banfield was no longer just a story of murder, it was a cautionary tale of manipulation, betrayal, and the dark consequences of human desire and deception. The prosecution left no stone unturned in their case against Brendan Banfield. After 11 months of meticulous preparation, they highlighted key inconsistencies in his account of February 24, 2023. First, they questioned his movements that morning. Brendan claimed to be heading to work, but instead he parked at a McDonald's and remained in his vehicle, apparently waiting for a call from Juliana. This suggested that he may have anticipated the events that would unfold. Rather than proceeding to his job as scheduled, another glaring issue involved the two 911 calls, spaced roughly 15 minutes apart. During the first call, the dispatcher heard only muffled moans. With no clear request for help, Juliana never indicated that she was in immediate danger. Why, prosecutors asked, was the situation not reported immediately if it was so urgent? They implied that perhaps the delay was because the perpetrators were not yet finished with their plan. The prosecution also scrutinized Brendan's instruction to Juliana to retrieve a second weapon after he had already shot Joseph Ryan. If Ryan posed an immediate threat, why would Brendan need her to fire again? This raised questions about the legitimacy of the self-defense claim, suggesting a lack of genuine urgency and hinting at premeditation. Investigators further discovered evidence that Brendan had orchestrated the impersonation of Christine Banfield on the FIT Life platform. The profile Anastasia 9 was first created by Brendan and then used by Juliana to lure Joseph Ryan to the Banfield home under false pretenses. Prosecutors argued that this demonstrated a deliberate plan to manipulate events, highlighting Brendan's willingness to engage in deceitful tactics to achieve his goals. Motive also played a significant role. Testimonies revealed that Brendan had expressed a desire to be free of his marriage shortly after beginning an affair with Juliana following the murders. He attempted to tamper with evidence, smearing Christine's blood on Ryan's body to frame him. The prosecution painted a picture of calculated deception and cold-blooded manipulation. Meanwhile, in April 2024, a major development occurred when Juliana entered a plea agreement facing charges of second-degree murder and the use of a firearm in connection with Ryan's death. She agreed to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, lesser charge under a negotiated deal. The agreement included her cooperation with law enforcement, providing crucial information about Brendan and the events of February 24th. This cooperation offered Juliana the potential for a reduced sentence, possibly up to 10 years, with credit for time served. The plea deal represented a turning point. Juliana's testimony and cooperation would bolster the prosecution's case against Brendan, giving investigators critical insight into the premeditation and orchestration behind the murders. Her sentencing was set for March 21, 2025, while Brendan's trial loomed on February 3, 2025, with charges of aggravated murder and the use of a firearm in the commission of a felony, potentially carrying life imprisonment without parole. As the courtroom battles approached, the complexities of the case remained under scrutiny. Investigators continued to explore all angles, piecing together a narrative that involved manipulation, deception, and calculated violence. The outcomes of these trials promised to be pivotal in delivering justice for the victims and holding accountable those responsible. Story 5. The disappearance of Karen Swift. On October 30, 2011, David Swift reported his wife, Karen, missing after returning home from a Halloween party the previous night. Karen, a 44-year-old mother of 4 from Dyersburg, Tennessee, had tucked their daughter Ashley into bed before going to sleep. By morning, she was nowhere to be found. Police discovered her abandoned vehicle on a rural highway A flat tire caused by a rusty screw, the only anomaly, initially. There were no signs of foul play at the vehicle, or the Swift. Resident Karen was known for her cheerful, selfless nature, working multiple jobs, including house cleaning and aerobics instruction to support her family. Friends described her as devoted and self-sacrificing, always putting the needs of others before her own, yet beneath this stable facade, Karen's marriage. 2. David Swift had been troubled. Both spouses had histories of infidelity, and tension had long plagued their relationship previously. David Swift had engaged in an extramarital affair that resulted in the birth of another child, although he and Karen reconciled after this incident. Trust between them remained fragile. In September 2011, Karen filed for divorce, citing ongoing issues in their marriage, a decision made just 3 weeks before her disappearance. Her move to seek independence intensified tensions at home, and David reportedly reacted negatively, feeling threatened by her desire for autonomy. On October 29, 2011, David made a sudden decision to relocate the family from Arkansas to Dyersburg, Tennessee. Acting independently, he secured a managerial position in a manufacturing firm and purchased a new home without consulting Karen. The abrupt nature of the move left their eldest son, Preston, behind to finish the school year, raising questions about David's motivations. Karen only saw the new home for the first time while unloading their belongings, further complicating her adjustment to the rushed relocation. Despite the challenges, Karen attempted to adapt. She found ways to earn income through house cleaning and teaching aerobics. However, David's controlling tendencies became increasingly apparent. Friends noted his resistance to Karen working outside the home, and his jealousy and insecurity escalated. Reports indicated he began stalking her during outings and confronting her over social interactions, creating a tense and restrictive environment. These dynamics would prove critical in understanding the events that followed. In the early hours of October 30, 2011, David contacted authorities to report Karen missing, expressing concern for her well-being. This call initiated the formal investigation into her disappearance. Police immediately began gathering information about Karen's last known activities and her interactions prior to vanishing. Later that afternoon, around 3 p.m., officers discovered Karen's white 2004 Nissan Murano, abandoned on the side of Millsfield Highway, roughly a quarter-mile from the Swift home. The vehicle had a flat tire caused by a rusty screw, but no signs of foul play were evident. Personal belongings, including her keys and purse, were missing. Yet forensic testing found no blood or evidence of a struggle inside the car. This discovery prompted investigators to widen their search to the surrounding area at home. David claimed he last saw Karen around 2 a.m. after returning from a Halloween party with their daughter Ashley. Ashley had called her mother to pick her up from a friend's house. David told police that both mother and daughter went to bed shortly after arriving home. He stated that he checked on Ashley to ensure she was safe before returning upstairs to sleep. His account raised questions among investigators regarding the timeline and his potential involvement, as he admitted to having no knowledge of any plans Karen might have had. That night, witnesses further highlighted David's controlling behavior toward Karen. Friends recounted instances of jealousy and possessiveness, noting that he frequently called her when she was out and often confronted her about social interactions. These behaviors raised concerns for Karen's safety and shaped investigators' focus on David as a person of interest. In the days following Karen's disappearance, David presented himself at the local police station, offering assistance in the search. Notably, he arrived on crutches, claiming to have re-injured a recently operated knee, a coincidental injury that raised additional suspicions given the troubled state of their marriage. Breakthrough came on December 10, 2011, when human remains were discovered in a cemetery less than 3 miles from the Swift home. The remains were found by 2 visitors, John Robinson and Mark Rickman, who immediately notified authorities. Forensic analysis later confirmed the remains were Karen's. An autopsy revealed that she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, injuries deemed fatal and classified as homicide. The findings shifted the case from a missing person investigation to a homicide inquiry, though the trauma was clearly lethal. The passage of time complicated efforts to determine the precise circumstances of her death. Investigators also noted no indication that the murder had occurred at the cemetery. Rather, it appeared Karen's body had been moved post-mortem. This discovery renewed scrutiny of David Swift. The location of her body and the nature of her injuries prompted investigators to examine his actions and statements more closely, searching for evidence linking him to her death. In the course of the investigation, authorities learned that Karen had obtained a second cell phone, hinting at potential steps she may have taken to communicate or document concerns prior to her disappearance. A detail that would later prove significant in piecing together the final timeline. Karen had obtained a second cell phone, which she kept hidden from David, suggesting a desire for privacy amid their troubled relationship. While David claimed ignorance of the phone, investigators discovered that its number was programmed into his work phone, raising suspicions that he may have been aware of her actions during interviews. David appeared more concerned with Karen's behavior, her alleged drinking and partying, than her safety. Detective McCree noted that David's focus on these details, rather than on her well-being, suggested he might be concealing something. Despite these concerns, authorities struggled to find physical or eyewitness evidence linking him directly to the homicide, causing the investigation to stall in the months following Karen's disappearance. David relocated to Alabama and remarried. He remained involved in their daughter Ashley's life, but provided no new leads in the case. Ashley expressed a growing desire to understand what had happened to her mother, but increasingly felt hopeless about finding answers. Investigators scrutinized David's claims about Karen's behavior after the family moved to Dyersburg, particularly her friendships with neighbors Bill and Kathy Bona. Forensic examinations conducted between December 16th and 20th, 2011, at the Swift home and in Karen's vehicle, found no signs of foul play in the house, though Karen's bedroom showed some disarray. Investigators also noted 7 gallons of bleach in the home, which David claimed were for cleaning up after a dog poisoning incident involving a neighbor. Despite public appeals for information and witness statements in early 2012, authorities faced a lack of concrete evidence against David, which hindered progress in the case. Testimonies suggested potential involvement, but definitive proof remained elusive. A significant breakthrough came on August 8, 2022, when David Swift was finally charged with first-degree premeditated murder in connection with Karen's death. More than a decade after her disappearance, the arrest shocked both the community and Karen's family, who had endured years of uncertainty. Ashley Swift, Karen's daughter, expressed confusion and distress at her father's arrest, highlighting the emotional turmoil the sudden development caused for the residents of Dyersburg. The arrest marked a striking turn in a case that had captivated the community for over 10 years. Many had followed Karen's disappearance closely, discussing it and hoping for answers. The long delay had left frustration and hopelessness, making David's arrest all the more momentous. Prosecutor Danny Goodman noted that prior attempts to secure a decisive verdict had failed due to inadequate approaches. Many had believed a key piece of evidence was needed to prove David's guilt, a piece that, Goodman later revealed, didn't exist. Instead, the case relied on building a puzzle, examining motive, behavioral patterns, and the circumstances surrounding Karen's life and death. According to Goodman, David had always exerted strict control over Karen, monitoring her movements and restricting her autonomy, but as her independence grew through social outings, drinking, partying, and the impending divorce, David's control began to slip. Frustration over this perceived loss of authority, combined with other stressors, ultimately contributed to his decision to plot her murder through careful reconstruction of events. The prosecution developed a concrete theory regarding Karen's death. They asserted that the murder had occurred inside the Swift family home rather than elsewhere, and that David orchestrated the crime in a calculated attempt to regain control. and eliminate the threat to his dominance over Karen. According to the prosecution, on the night of October 29, 2011, David Swift allegedly waited until Karen and Ashley were asleep before making his move. Evidence suggested that he struck Karen with a blunt object, inflicting fatal head trauma while she was still inside the family home. Investigators concluded that the attack was deliberate and methodical, designed to ensure her death while leaving minimal, immediate evidence of the crime after committing the murder. David reportedly transported Karen's body to a nearby cemetery, less than 3 miles from the Swift home, and concealed her remains. Among other graves, the location was chosen to delay discovery and complicate the investigation. This careful placement indicated premeditation, consistent with the charge of first-degree murder. Prosecution also highlighted David's behavior in the days following the murder. He reported Karen missing, seemingly concerned, and even assisted law enforcement in their search. However, his actions were framed as calculated, designed to deflect suspicion and appear cooperative while the investigation unfolded. Investigators pointed out inconsistencies in his statements and noted that his focus on Karen's social life rather than on her safety reinforced their belief in his culpability. Forensic evidence, while limited due to the passage of time, played a key role in building the case. The discovery of Karen's remains, coupled with the timeline of David's movements, supported the prosecution's theory. Additionally, investigators pieced together behavioral patterns, prior incidents of controlling and jealous behavior, and the timing of her disappearance, all of which suggested motive and opportunity in the lead-up to the trial. The prosecution argued that David's premeditation was clear. His long-standing control over Karen, combined with the stressors of her impending divorce, her use of a secret phone, and her social independence, provided both motive and context for the calculated murder. By staging the scene and reporting her missing, he attempted to manipulate the narrative, but investigators contended that the truth had finally been uncovered. The case against David Swift set the stage for a high-profile trial, with prosecutors emphasizing both the emotional and logical elements of the crime. Karen's daughter, Ashley, and other family members were prepared to testify, offering insight into David's controlling behavior and the family dynamics leading up to the tragedy. As the trial approached, the community braced for a confrontation that would finally determine accountability for Karen Swift's death. More than a decade after her disappearance, the prosecution framed the case as one of cold calculation, emphasizing the motive, premeditation, and deliberate actions that ultimately led to the murder. The prosecution alleged that David staged a series of events to make Karen Swift's murder appear as an abduction. According to their theory, on the night of October 30th, Karen picked up her daughter Ashley, and both returned home. Falling asleep together in bed, David allegedly moved Ashley to a different room and then attacked Karen in the garage, stomping on her head to simulate the aftermath of a violent abduction. He then supposedly loaded her body into the car, drove to a nearby cemetery, and concealed her remains to support their theory. Prosecutors highlighted David's behavior after the murder. He had voluntarily assisted authorities in searching for Karen, even arriving on crutches, to emphasize his inability to drag her body. Prosecutors argued that his knee injury, which required surgery months earlier, was faked to strengthen his alibi. They also refuted the idea that Karen had left voluntarily, noting that she had taken a sleeping aid, Badril, before going to bed. They argued it was unlikely she would plan to go out after taking a sedative. Forensic evidence showed her secret phone had been active after she went to bed, with a call made to voicemail at 9:55 a.m. on October 30th, while connected to the family's Wi-Fi, raising suspicion that David may have used it. Neighbors further challenged his claim of being incapacitated, testifying that David had recently helped move 60-pound hay bales without using crutches. The prosecution built a circumstantial case, linking David's alleged controlling behavior, the timing of events, and the forensic evidence to the murder. The defense, led by Daniel Taylor, presented a contrasting narrative. Taylor argued that David was a concerned husband, not a controlling abuser. He questioned the reliability of evidence about Karen's behavior, highlighting her history of alcoholism and partying. Neighbors testified that Karen had often been found intoxicated at parties, sometimes needing David to pick her up. The defense suggested that some allegations about Karen being involved in a sex ring were either exaggerated or irrelevant to the case. Taylor also disputed the prosecution's claims of David staging the crime. He noted there was no blood in the garage or car, and no evidence that David left the house that night. The medical examiner had revised the original conclusion that Karen had been stomped on the head, weakening the prosecution's argument. Furthermore, physical therapists testified that David's knee injury severely limited his mobility and ability to lift or stomp, making it highly unlikely he could have overpowered Karen. Regarding the alleged use of bleach to clean up evidence, Taylor pointed out that the pool had been cleaned around the same time, and the photo of bleach cited by the prosecution was insufficient to prove tampering. Leslie Swift testified in support of her father, stating that it was actually her mother who moved her to a different room that night. She confirmed that she recognized her mother's touch and was confident in her recollection. Ashley also noted that her father's physical condition would have prevented him from overpowering her athletic mother. Finally, the defense challenged the prosecution's claims about Karen's secret phone, arguing that linking it to the murder was speculative. They suggested it was possible Karen simply left the phone at home, taken together. Taylor's arguments emphasized that David's injury, physical limitations, and the available evidence made it implausible for him to have committed the murder, as alleged. Additionally, the defense argued that David Swift's actions were motivated by concern for his partner. If this claim is accepted, it is plausible that he made the voicemail call to check on Karen's whereabouts, rather than as part of a nefarious plan. The weakest aspect of the prosecution's case was the lack of physical evidence. Investigators found no incriminating traces in the home, vehicle, or on David himself. There was also no murder weapon, forcing prosecutors to hypothesize that David had used his foot. Despite his known physical limitations throughout the trial, David's defense maintained, despite objections from the state, that the charges were politically motivated. They argued that, with no direct evidence linking David to the crime, the sheriff and district attorney, both facing re-election, felt pressured to pursue the case. When the jury returned its verdict, the outcome was surprising. David Swift was found not guilty of first and second-degree murder, as well as attempted first and second-degree murder. However, the jury remained deadlocked on the voluntary manslaughter charge, ultimately informing the judge that they could not reach a unanimous decision. This deadlock led to a mistrial in June 2024. Since then, new developments have emerged. David's ex-wife, Kelly Essman, came forward during a 2020's appearance, alleging that he stalked her. Kelly revealed that she met David on a dating site 3 years after Karen's death, and the two married in 2016. In October 2024, the Tennessee Court of Appeals denied a motion from David's legal team to dismiss the voluntary manslaughter charge. He pleaded not guilty, and the charge will be revisited in a new trial. David remains in custody awaiting trial on the voluntary manslaughter charge, while also facing separate stalking allegations from his ex-wife in Alabama. Both cases are ongoing, as authorities and legal teams continue to pursue Justice Story 6. Susan Cox Powell. On December 6, 2009, Susan Cox Powell vanished from her West Valley City, Utah home, leaving behind a trail of suspicion. Her husband, Josh Powell, quickly became the primary person of interest, as troubling details about their family life and his behavior soon surfaced. The case would ultimately become more than just a disappearance. It would reveal a series of betrayals and a heartbreaking outcome for all involved. Susan Marie Cox was born on October 16, 1981, in West Valley City, Utah. She was raised in a warm household with strong work ethics and family values. Pursuing a career in cosmetology, She later worked for Wells Fargo Investments. Susan was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints LDS, shaping her beliefs and social nature. Joshua Powell was born on January 20th, 1976, in Puyallup, Washington, to Stephen and Tara Powell. His childhood was marked by dysfunction, including his parents' divorce in the early 1990s, Stephen's abusive behavior, and Joshua's own troubling tendencies: animal cruelty, violent threats, and at least one suicide attempt during adolescence. Joshua and Susan met in 1999 at an LDS Church Institute course in Puyallup, Washington, and married in April 2001 at the Portland, Oregon temple. Their early marriage appeared stable, but financial struggles soon arose. They briefly lived with Joshua's father, Stephen, whose inappropriate fixation on Susan created tension. Although Joshua and Susan moved out to distance themselves from Stephen, the strain persisted. Reports indicated Stephen would spy on Susan, further destabilizing the household. As Joshua and Susan settled into life in West Valley City, they welcomed two sons, Charles in January 2005 and Braden in January 2007. Despite the family's joy, underlying tensions worsened. Joshua became increasingly controlling, and Susan documented her concerns in journals and letters to friends. On June 28, 2008, she warned that if something happened to her, it might not be an accident, even if it appeared soon. December 6, 2009. Susan attended church with her two sons, Charlie and Braden. Returning home afterward around 5 p.m., a neighbor saw Susan lying down for a nap, reportedly feeling unwell. This was the last sighting of her outside the family. Later that day, Susan made her final phone call to a friend at approximately 2:29 p.m., an ordinary conversation that raised no immediate concern, but would later become a key point in the timeline of her disappearance. This final communication from Susan would later prove critical in reconstructing her last known movements before she disappeared that evening. Josh Powell claimed that he took Charlie and Braden sledding and later went on a camping trip to Simpson Springs in Utah's remote West Desert around midnight. Investigators immediately questioned this story, given the freezing temperatures and the impracticality of camping with young children under such conditions. Neighbors reported seeing Josh return around 8:30 p.m., directly contradicting his claimed timeline. When police arrived at the Powell home that evening, they found Josh with Susan's cell phone in his vehicle and several other items that would later draw scrutiny. On the morning of December 7, 2009, Susan's absence became apparent when she failed to drop off her sons at daycare after repeated failed attempts to reach Josh and Susan. The daycare provider contacted Josh's mother, Tarika Powell, and his sister, Jennifer Graves. Alarmed by the situation, they went to the Powell home, found it quiet and unresponsive, and called the police. The West Valley City Police responded, promptly concerned that the family might be victims of carbon monoxide poisoning. Officers forced entry into the home. Inside, they found signs of a struggle. Box fans were positioned over a damp area on the carpet, immediately raising suspicion. Susan's purse, wallet, and identification were still in the house, suggesting she had not left voluntarily. The police considered these findings crucial evidence. Later that afternoon, Josh returned home with Charlie and Braden, claiming they had been sledding. Officers immediately noted that Susan's cell phone was in his vehicle, with the SIM card removed, detailed heightening suspicion. Police also found items in the car, including a generator, blankets, a gas canister, and tarps. Inconsistent with Josh's story of sledding. During questioning that evening, Josh maintained that he did not know Susan's whereabouts and claimed she had been at home when he left for the camping trip. However, inconsistencies in his statements became increasingly apparent as investigators delved deeper. Investigators also interviewed Susan's eldest son, Charlie. He stated that Susan had gone camping with them but did not return home, casting further doubt on Josh's narrative. Charlie's account, while from a young child, suggested that Susan had been with the family during the critical hours of her disappearance, challenging Josh's version of events. On December 9, 2009, police executed a search warrant at the Powell residence. They discovered blood near a damp sofa, which fans had been used to dry. DNA analysis later confirmed one sample matched Susan, while another belonged to an unknown male. Investigators also recovered a letter Susan had written, expressing her concerns about her marriage. In it, she detailed a lack of attraction between her and Josh, and warned that if anything happened to her, it might not be an accident, blaming her husband and his family. These pieces of evidence shifted the investigation toward Josh Powell, directly contradicting his narrative that Susan had vanished without a trace in the days following her disappearance. Josh exhibited behavior that further aroused suspicion. He withdrew large sums from Susan's retirement accounts using a power of attorney, canceled her chiropractic appointments, and was reported by friends to have previously discussed methods of disposing of a body, including abandoned mine shafts in Utah's. The investigation unfolded. Authorities became increasingly focused on Josh Powell as the prime suspect in Susan's disappearance. His actions in the days after she vanished only deepened their suspicions. Beyond withdrawing money and canceling appointments, investigators noted that he seemed unusually composed and at times evasive when discussing his wife's whereabouts. His conflicting accounts of the night's events, coupled with the blood evidence found in the home, painted a troubling picture. By December 2009, law enforcement had established that Susan's disappearance was unlikely to be voluntary. Her personal belongings, including her purse, wallet, and identification, remained in the home, and her secret fears, documented in letters, reinforced concerns that she was in danger from someone she knew. Combined with the forensic evidence, the case against Josh gained momentum, although there was still no concrete proof of what had happened to Susan over the following years. The investigation into Susan Powell's disappearance grew increasingly complex. Authorities examined Josh's history, uncovering troubling behaviors that went beyond controlling tendencies. Friends, family, and neighbors described him as manipulative and secretive, with a pattern of hostility toward anyone perceived as a threat to his control over the family. These insights, while circumstantial, helped shape the understanding of the dynamics within the Powell household. The case took a devastating turn in 2012. On February 5th, Josh Powell carried out a horrifying act that would end all hope of ever recovering Susan. He drove with their two young sons, Charles and Braden, to a remote location and set his house on fire, killing himself and the children in the process. This final act not only destroyed any chance of solving Susan's disappearance through direct questioning, but also left law enforcement and her surviving family with an unspeakable tragedy to grapple with in the aftermath. Investigators pieced together the chain of events, linking Josh's manipulative behavior, the suspicious evidence in the home, and his prior comments about disposing of a body to the conclusion that Susan had likely been murdered by her husband while he evaded formal charges for her death due to the final tragedy. The case became a stark example of how domestic control, manipulation, and premeditated actions can culminate in devastating outcomes. Susan Cox Powell's disappearance and death remain a sobering story, illustrating the critical need for early intervention in cases of domestic abuse and the challenges law enforcement faces when evidence is circumstantial and suspects are deceptive. Her life, her warnings, and the tragic fate of her children serve as a somber reminder of the consequences of unchecked control and manipulation within a family. Her estate, but Chuck Cox, Susan's brother, successfully contested the claims. This legal victory allowed him to maintain oversight of Susan's financial and personal affairs, preserving her legacy despite the ongoing tragedy. Investigators and the public remained haunted by the unresolved questions surrounding Susan's disappearance, the West Desert, the Powell family dynamics, and the suspicious behaviors of Josh and Michael Powell left an enduring cloud of uncertainty. Even though Josh had died along with his sons, authorities continued to evaluate any potential involvement of other family members, especially Stephen Powell, given his history of voyeurism harassment, and obsession with Susan. The tragic sequence of events from Susan's disappearance to the deaths of her husband Josh and his 2 sons, followed by Michael Powell's suicide, left investigators and family members grappling with an almost incomprehensible web of loss, suspicion, and unanswered questions, while law enforcement officially closed the investigation in July 2013. The case remained a cautionary tale of domestic control, obsession, and the devastating consequences of family dysfunctions. Susan Cox Powell's disappearance and death highlight the profound challenges in cases where evidence is circumstantial. Family dynamics are deeply troubled, and the prime suspect dies before justice can be fully served. Her story continues to resonate with the public, emphasizing the need for vigilance, early intervention in abusive situations, and the importance of following up on warning signs, both for the protection of potential victims and for the pursuit of justice following the closure of the active investigation in 2013. Many questions about Susan Powell's fate remained unresolved. Law enforcement maintained that Josh Powell was the most likely person responsible for her disappearance, but the absence of a body and direct evidence made it impossible to file formal charges. Authorities continued to scrutinize the Powell family, particularly Stephen Powell, due to his history of voyeurism, harassment, and obsession with Susan. The deaths of Josh Powell and his sons, followed by Michael Powell's suicide, left investigators with a trail of tragedy and unanswered questions. The case exemplified how a combination of controlling behavior, family dysfunction, and suspected violence can escalate into devastating consequences. Despite the legal closure, public interest and scrutiny remained high, with many continuing to debate the extent of the family's involvement. Susan Powell's story remains a stark reminder of the dangers posed by domestic control and obsession, highlighting the critical importance of intervention in situations where warning signs appear. Her disappearance and presumed death underscore the challenges law enforcement faces when key evidence is missing, and demonstrate how the impact of family dysfunction can ripple outward, leaving lasting trauma for surviving relatives and the community. Despite Susan Powell's disappearance officially being closed in 2013, the shadow of her case lingered over the Powell family and West Valley City community for years. The tragic deaths of Josh Powell and his sons, along with Michael Powell's suicide, created an unsettling pattern of loss, leaving investigators and the public to wonder how much more could have been prevented. Experts later emphasized the warning signs that had been evident in Josh's controlling and obsessive behaviors prior to Susan's disappearance, behavior that escalated into a deadly trajectory for his family. Law enforcement continued to study patterns of domestic control and psychological manipulation revealed through Susan's journals, the letters she wrote to friends, and statements she had made about feeling unsafe. These documents painted a vivid picture of a woman trapped in a relationship marked by coercion, intimidation, and looming violence. Susan's proactive attempts to protect her children from Stephen Powell's inappropriate fixation highlighted her awareness of danger, but unfortunately, even her vigilance could not prevent the tragedy that unfolded. The story of Susan Powell was emblematic of systemic challenges in domestic violence cases. Her disappearance, compounded by the lack of a body, made prosecution impossible, and yet it revealed how subtle warning signs, jealousy, stalking, controlling behavior, and prior threats can escalate to catastrophic outcomes if not addressed in time. Advocacy groups later cited the Powell case as a sobering example for reform, emphasizing the need for early intervention and comprehensive monitoring in situations of domestic abuse. Meanwhile, in Dyersburg, Tennessee, the legal saga of David Swift continued to unfold. His ex-wife Karen Swift's murder remained unsolved in many ways. Even as political and public scrutiny complicated proceedings, the jury's inability to reach a unanimous verdict on voluntary manslaughter reflected the difficulty in reconciling circumstantial evidence with David's physical limitations and the inconsistencies in the prosecution's narrative. Taylor, David's defense attorney, had effectively highlighted gaps in the state's theory, no blood traces in the garage, the impossibility of David moving Karen while on crutches, and Ashley's testimony confirming her mother had moved Hertha Swift. Case highlighted another recurring theme in true crime investigations: the tension between circumstantial evidence and physical proof. While controlling behavior and marital discord can establish motive, proving opportunity and capability remains crucial in a court of law. David Swift's case underscored how the absence of definitive physical evidence could shift the balance in favor of the defense, even amid decades-long suspicions and community pressure. Similarly, in Utah, the Powell investigation demonstrated how family dynamics, obsession, and control can intertwine to produce a deadly outcome. Josh Powell's manipulation, the complicity or, at least the proximity of his father, Stephen, and Michael Powell's subsequent suicide illustrated the cascading effects of unchecked behaviors within a family unit. In both the Swift and Powell cases, investigators had to contend not only with evidence gaps, but with complex interpersonal histories, psychological profiling, and public scrutiny, of which influenced the interpretation of events in high-stakes murder investigations. The evolution of investigative technology also played a critical role in these cases. For instance, forensic analysis of Karen Swift's secret phone, Wi-Fi logs, and toxicology reports became central to the prosecution's theory. While in Susan Powell's case, DNA evidence on carpets and personal items provided the first hard links pointing toward foul play. Yet, in both scenarios, the passage of time, the lack of a definitive body, and the interplay of family narratives made the path to justice convoluted and prolonged. These cases collectively illustrate a recurring pattern: relationships marked by coercion, jealousy, and psychological control can escalate to fatal outcomes. True crime investigators, psychologists, and law enforcement alike often note that the behavioral precursors, such as stalking, isolation, obsessive jealousy, and prior threats, are as telling as any physical evidence in predicting potential violence. The tragic outcomes for Karen Swift, Susan Powell, and countless others underscore the urgent need for awareness, intervention, and systemic improvements in both domestic abuse response and criminal investigation protocols. As the Swift case continues toward a new trial for voluntary manslaughter, and as the Powell case remains a cautionary tale, these stories remind us of the complex interplay of motive, opportunity, and evidence in criminal justice. They also reflect the human cost of control and obsession, how unchecked behaviors can devastate families, disrupt communities, and leave a trail of questions that may never be fully answered. Following Susan Powell's disappearance, Chuck Cox ultimately gained full control of her estate, ensuring that her assets were managed according to her family's wishes. Initially, Josh Powell's mother, Tara, and sister, Alina, sought to have Susan declared legally dead in order to access life insurance benefits. After a prolonged legal battle, Chuck Cox secured control of the estate, safeguarding Susan's legacy and prioritizing the welfare of her children. Charlie and Braden. The Cox family also pursued legal action against Washington State's Department of Social and Health Services, DSHS, alleging negligence by social workers who had, in their view, prioritized Joshua Powell's parental rights over the safety of the children. In 2015, a federal court initially ruled in favor of DSHS, granting the agency immunity and finding no negligence. However, in 2019, an appeals court allowed claims of negligence to proceed, resulting in a jury verdict that DSHS had been negligent in awarding $98 million to the estates of Charlie and Braden Powell. Beyond the legal battles, the Cox family became advocates for legislative reform. They lobbied Washington and Utah lawmakers to restrict visitation rights for parents under investigation for serious crimes, including murder, seeking to prevent future tragedies caused by lapses in oversight. Their efforts highlighted the systemic gaps in child protection, particularly in cases where parental behavior posed a credible threat to minors, despite the absence of Susan Powell's remains. It is widely believed she was murdered by her husband, Joshua Powell. Over the years, there have been repeated calls to officially declare her legally dead, with homicide as the cause in early 2022. A cave exploration team investigated a mine shaft in Utah's West Desert in search of her remains, while they discovered rib bones and scraps of clothing. DNA testing revealed that none belonged to Susan. They were identified as animal remains. Additional items recovered, including a pair of pants, tested positive for male DNA, which investigators are still attempting to identify. Throughout the investigation, questions have persisted about Joshua Powell's involvement and whether other family members, including his father Stephen and brother Michael, may have played a role. Evidence revealed disturbing patterns of behavior control, obsession, and prior threats that suggest premeditation. Yet the deaths of Josh and his children complicated legal proceedings. Michael Powell's suicide in 2013 left even more unanswered questions about the family's potential complicity. The Powell case remains one of the most haunting examples of the intersection between domestic control, obsession, and systemic failure. Even without a body, investigators were able to piece together disturbing behaviors, financial manipulations, and documented warnings from Susan herself, illustrating how domestic abuse can escalate into tragedies. Unresolved nature of Susan Powell's fate continues to spark debate and reflection. What truly happened to her? Was she murdered by her husband alone, or were other family members involved? Where is her body, and how could the systems in place have better protected her and her children? These lingering questions serve as a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance, advocacy, and awareness as the rain falls and the night grows quiet. We, at Crime Whispers, invite you to reflect on these stories. They remind us that life's mysteries are often interwoven with human behavior, deception, and tragedy. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep. And until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.